All right, good morning. Excuse me. My name is Dean Bruce, and I work for the New Mexico Department of Ag. And specifically, I am a co-lead on our Healthy Soil program. And so that's what we're going to visit a little bit about today. So when we think about healthy soil, what does it actually mean to us, and why is it important? Okay. This is a definition that we stole from USDA NRCS, and the soil health is the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Okay, but what does that actually mean to us? You know, when we think about healthy soil, what does it mean to us as humans? Is the fact that soil does prevent a lot of catastrophes, but it also provides us with a lot of food. So why does it matter? Today we're here at the water conference. One of the primary means of measuring and determining soil health is the ability of soil to absorb and store water. Okay, because the ability to absorb and store water then can lead to plant growth, animal growth, things like that. But we also look at sustaining a diverse, productive plant and animal life. Okay, and so by the soil's ability to store water and absorb it, utilize it, we can get that diversity of plant growth, animal life. It also provides physical stability to support plant roots, so that the ability of the soil to maintain its structure can prevent a lot of erosion problems, things like that. And so just this physical stability that we rely on is part of soil health. But then also storing, transforming, and cycling nutrients. Okay. So when we look at soil health, we do have the NMDA's soil health or healthy soil program. Okay, it was put into law in 2019 based on the Healthy Soil Act. The program purpose, pretty simple: to promote and support farming and ranching systems and other forms of land management that increase soil organic matter, aggregate stability, microbiology, water retention to improve the health, yield, and profitability of the soils within the state. Okay, that's directly out of the Act. That's the purpose of the Healthy Soil Act, and therefore that became the purpose of our Healthy Soil program. We do have several areas that we can fund through the Healthy Soil program funding. The most popular one is the on-the-ground grants. These are grants to individuals, eligible entities. We'll get into that later, but this is for on-the-ground soil health improvement. Okay, but we also fund soil assessment and education, promotion and outreach, capacity building for eligible entities. We'll get into those eligible entities that can apply for this funding later, but then also soil health research. Okay. The core, the backbone of the Healthy Soil program are the 5 soil health principles. Okay, these are specified in the Act, 1 through 5 listed there on top. These are specific. Depending on what industry magazine you pick up, you may see 4 soil health principles. You may see 6. I guess we kind of split the middle, and we have 5. So we'll go through those just a little bit. And those are also on the bottom side there. Those are examples of things we can do to address those soil health principles. The one thing I want y'all to get away from the soil health principles is they're not prescriptive. Okay, these principles are simply guiding principles. It's not something you do. It's something you need to think about as you're managing land. So the first one, this is probably the most important one, is to just keep soil covered. Okay, because the more cover we can maintain on our soil, the more water that infiltrates it, it's less prone to erosion. Cover moderates the temperature so that you can maintain plant and animal life. So keeping soil covered, that's a very important principle behind the Healthy Soil program. So some of the examples of things individuals can do to maintain soil cover: planting a cover crop, leaving crop residue in the field to decompose, but also managing our rangelands at a level that will maintain plant cover, okay? Then number two, minimizing disturbance on cropland, minimizing external inputs. When we think about soil disturbance, we want to minimize that in any way possible, because the more soil is disturbed, the more quickly plant life or organic matter degrades, and the less you can build up organic matter over time. So we want to minimize that disturbance on cropland. Same thing with rangeland. We want to minimize disturbance. Well, what does that mean on rangeland? That means to manage your grazing intensity so that it's not actually disturbing the soil. But also, there's another way to look at that. When we talk about minimizing external inputs, we want to minimize the things that we have to bring from off-farm or off-ranch onto our operation to maintain our operation, okay? Then number three, we want to maximize biodiversity. In rangeland, we want to maintain that beneficial balance of cool season grasses, warm season grasses, forb shrubs, things like that. But we want that diversity of plant life, because that's what helps maintain a soil, or I guess you could say helps maintain a ranch over time, is to have that balance of plant life. So some of the things we can do, of course, on cropland, we can grow different types of crops, different types of cash crops, along with our rotation. But then also on rangeland, we just want to maintain our grazing intensity so that we don't move beyond the point where we're actually disturbing the soil, okay? Maintaining a living root. This one's actually, to me, it ties right back to keeping soil covered, because a living root, I think about it this way. Basically, that's straws into the ground, okay? The more roots you can have, the more water you can take up, okay? The more water that gets into the soil versus washes off, okay? So we want to grow season-long crops, planting cover crops in rotation with our cash crops, but basically we want a root or a straw in the ground at all times, okay? And then, of course, integrating animals into land management. That's a critical component of healthy soils, because if you completely remove animals from the landscape, it decreases the ability of the landscape to cycle nutrients, to function as it's supposed to, okay? And I'm not just talking about, grazing animals, but we talk about birds, beneficial insects, keystone species such as earthworms. If you completely remove animal integration from your management, it will definitely harm the landscape. So this is probably the slide everybody wants. Who can apply for the Healthy Soil Program? Okay, we have two different applicant types that can apply for the Healthy Soil Program. Okay, the first one there on your left is what we call eligible entities. This is specified in the Act. These are local governmental entities with proven land management capacity to support healthy soil. What's that mean? Pueblos, tribes, nations, they can apply for this funding. Acequias, land grants, soil and water conservation districts, NMSU Cooperative Extension Service, and other governmental parties meeting the above definition of an eligible entity. So we have had conservancy districts apply for this funding. As long as they have the capacity to support healthy soils and the ability to distribute funding and work with their constituents, we can work with them as an eligible entity. You'll notice the eligible entities can apply for up to $100,000. And so this allows those entities to do larger scale projects. This includes mileage to and from the sites that they may utilize, and also an administrative fee that goes back to the eligible entity. So $100,000 max on that. But then on the right-hand side, we have the individual applicants. These are New Mexico's farmers, ranchers, other land managers can apply as an individual applicant. This can also include businesses, nonprofits. As long as they are managing land within New Mexico, they can apply for this, okay? However, there is a catch. There's always a catch. In order for individual applicants to apply for this grant, they must work with a project sponsor. Okay, this project sponsor basically allows us at NMDA to cut a check to the sponsor, who then can in turn give it to that individual applicant. It goes back to the anti-donation clause. I'm not going into that, but just bear in mind, if you are an individual applicant and you want to apply for this, you must go through one of these two project sponsors that are qualified to do this. The first is your Soil and Water Conservation District, and I'm kind of going a little bit out of order, but you must apply either through a local Soil and Water Conservation District, or you can apply through your Pueblo tribe or nation in which you're a member of. Okay, so just bear that in mind. But then also, individual applicants need to go through the conservation planning process with USDA NRCS. Okay, this allows the individual to identify resource concerns along with a certified conservation planner that can help guide them through that process. Individuals can apply for up to $24,999.99. There's a reason for that, but I'm not going into it. But basically, they can get just under $25,000. Okay, and these are for on-the-ground projects on land that they either own or manage. I would encourage everybody to go to the NMDA Healthy Soil Program website. We do have an interactive map now where you can view all the projects that are across the state that have currently been funded up to today. And once you click on that, it'll actually give you a project summary. We don't have specific locations, but it'll give you a project summary, the general location of where that project occurred, and kind of tell you a little bit about it. So I would encourage each and every one of you, if you have an opportunity, I believe there's going to be a QR code at the end of the presentation. You can snap on that, and it'll take you directly to our website where you can play around on this interactive map. So I'm just going to go through some of the sample projects that have been funded through the Healthy Soil Program. These are specific to cropland. We have a lot of individuals that are applying for cover crops, okay? Especially diverse mixes of cover crops throughout the fall, and also spring cover crops. And what this does, those cover crops are designed to simply cover the soil until you're ready to plant a cash crop. Okay, and it also, when you get ready to plant your cash crop, you terminate the cover crop, and therefore you can build soil organic matter through the use of a cover crop. So we've funded quite a few cover crop projects throughout the state. We've also funded quite a few people that have implemented pollinator habitat, okay, to improve pollination of cash crops, but also just to benefit that overall diversity of their operation. We've had individuals that are currently interested in biochar, which is basically a fancy name for charcoal. But it is really good at storing carbon in the soil and also absorbing moisture. And so biochar projects have been especially popular. We do have a current biochar project that's going on at the NMSU Science Center down in Las Cruces at Linedecker. And they're observing the effects of biochar amendments on different cropping systems. Now, as far as rangeland, we do quite a few projects on rangeland across the state. The one over on the left, that's actually a new one that we've had applied for and have been granted. We have some individuals that are doing subsoiling, okay? And so the goal behind subsoiling is to take some of that land that has been compacted over time, that has maybe a little bit degraded, and basically they're running a subsoiler, which is a fancy name for a ripper. And basically what it does, you can see, if you look on that picture right there, you can kind of see the lines. Basically they run about 8 to 10 inches deep. They're set on about 36-inch centers, and it basically opens up the soil to be able to take in water. It also kind of breaks up that compaction layer, and so we have people doing that. A lot of people have applied to just get some infrastructure improvements to do intensive rotational grazing on their rangelands. And then as of late, there's been quite a bit of interest also in bale grazing, which a lot of people think, oh, we're feeding bales, but what we're doing is it's a strategic way to build organic matter on rangeland, okay, and improve cover and things like that. And so these are just a sampling of the projects that we've done throughout the program years. And so huge improvement for FY26. We are fixing to roll out FY26 actually on the 7th, which I believe is Thursday. We're going to have a webinar to basically roll out our FY26 funding year. And one of the benefits that we now have due to some different funding that came through the legislature is that we are going to actually fund projects a little over or about 15 months. In the past, the projects were bound by the state's fiscal year, and so they ended up only actually being about 10 months because we had, the month of July, we had to wait to kind of get funding from the state, and then the next June, we had to finalize all of our invoices and everything, so individuals only had about 10 months. Now they're going to have about 15 months, and so they will, like I said, we're going to roll out the program on Thursday. The applications will actually open in January to where they can apply online. But the FY26 Healthy Soil Program grants will run from July 2025 to September of 2026, giving you more than a year to complete a lot of these practices and kind of see the benefits of them. So where can these happen? Basically anywhere in New Mexico. The Healthy Soil Program grants can be on any type of operation. We're talking cropland, rangeland, forest land, orchards, vineyards, backyard gardens. We do not have an acreage maximum or minimum. And so we do fund a lot of urban agriculture. That's what I refer to it as. But we fund community gardens, subsistence gardens, and also backyard gardens. But any type of land that is in ag production across the state, we will consider for funding. You do not have to own it. If you lease it, you do have to have permission from the landowner to do these projects on that. But you do not have to own any land. And again, like I mentioned before, there is no minimum or maximum to the size of the project. We've had projects as small as 100 square feet, as large as 25,000 acres. And so it's pretty much, it runs the gamut of projects across the state. Okay, so the one thing I would encourage you to do is visit our website. If you know somebody or you are interested in applying for the Healthy Soil Program, we do have, basically, once you get to our website, we have all the information that would be needed for you to apply for the Healthy Soil Program, either as an eligible entity or an individual applicant. Okay, so once you get to our website, you will determine whether you're an eligible entity, individual applicant. You'll click on that portion of the website. All the information will be provided at that time to give you the whole application process and what you need to do to begin the process. We encourage both individual applicants and eligible entities to begin the planning now. We've got, basically November and December until the actual online application opens to where you can apply, but we encourage that early planning process. And then the actual application will open January 15th. And will run until March 19th. So keep those dates in mind as you're thinking about a project. If you know anybody that may be interested in a project whether they're from a Pueblo tribe or nation, a land grant, an acequia, an SWCD, we encourage all comers when it comes to those eligible entity type projects. And again, that date, January 15th, is when the online portion of it will open. But we encourage that early planning, and so you can get in touch with us. And there's the QR code, but I want you to really focus on that email address right there at the bottom, because that is your way to get a hold of me. and I am more than willing to work with any eligible entities or individual applicants that are interested in applying for the program. I basically travel the state. I have statewide responsibility for the technical portion of the program, and so I encourage you, get a hold of me. The best way, like I said, is that email right there, hsp@nmda.nmsu.edu. Address it to Dean Bruce, and if you need technical assistance, project guidance, if you just want to brainstorm on some of the projects, I'd be more than willing to help you. I'll have cards in the back here in a minute, but we just definitely want to make this program as accessible to all entity types and individuals across the state as we can. And so part of that is just contacting me, and I will help walk through the process of the technical portion of your project. As far as the actual applying, I'll do everything but type it for you. So I'll help you kind of understand the program parameters, because there are some parameters. There's going to be an FAQ that will go live on our website on November 7th to kind of help keep you in the guardrails, so to speak. But other than that, that's our program. I know I went through that fairly quickly, but I wanted to save a few minutes for questions. And so, again, there's that QR code that takes you to our website. And if you're interested in technical assistance for this program, get a hold of me through that email, or like I said, I'll have some cards here in the back. So any questions at this point? Yes, ma'am.
Do you have anyone in the program experimenting with those?
We have quite a few individuals that are currently moving towards no-till. And one of the problems we face across the state, and this is not just across the state, but it's across the nation right now, there's definitely an equipment shortage, especially an equipment shortage for small farms, what I call small farms, anything under 30 acres. If you want a 40-foot no-till drill, those are easy to find. If you want a 7-foot no-till drill, vast majority of northern New Mexico, you got 5-acre, 10-acre places. They use smaller drills. Those are hard to come by, but we can get inventive. There are some equipment things we can work on to help individuals transition to no-till with whatever equipment they currently have. But yes, we do have a lot of people that are experimenting with no-till and seeing some great results around the state. Yes, sir.
Are you doing a lot of projects with acequias?
We have worked with a few acequias, but not as many as we would like to. But the program it's completely wide open to the acequias, but we haven't had as much participation through the acequias as we would like to, but we will definitely work with them and be happy to help them with the technical side of the program if they would like to contact me. Yes, ma'am.
Follow up on that. If a lot of times we found with the acequias that capacity is an issue. So, for example, the Mexico Acequia Association has a program that works with the OSC and the IC to do capital improvements, and so they will facilitate that process. I know under the eligible entities, nonprofits is not included, have to be a government entity, but I'm wondering if in the future you might consider that, particularly for acequias, that perhaps the Acequia Association could be, I think the projects that I'm thinking of would be different than the individual, would be more the eligible applicants we're interested in. But maybe an opener to that could be that the Acequia Association could be a sponsor, for example, for the applicants. Anyway, any discussion of trying to tackle that issue?
What we've done in the past is, we've had some acequias that have approached us, and basically they've went through the route of applying as an individual with the Soil and Water Conservation District as their project sponsor to handle that administrative burden for them. And so that's been our workaround. Unfortunately, because of the state's laws, we cannot work directly with a nonprofit or a non-governmental entity. And so that's kind of, unfortunately, that's our drawback, but there is the workaround because we can utilize a soil and water conservation district to take on that administrative burden for an acequia. And that's what we've done that a couple times because they just didn't have the governance structure, I'll put it that way, to administer one of these grants. And so they just applied it as an individual using the soil and water conservation district as their sponsor.
Just a quick follow-up question. Since the governmental entity is your requirement, I imagine you can work with the watershed district.
Yes, if there's a bona fide watershed district, we can work with them. Yes, sir.
Curious about biochar. Been around a lot of fuel treatments. That's always been one of those things the Forest Service has been trying to promote. I mean, is there a price point? Is there a market point where it's become economically viable?
Okay, the problem we've ran into biochar is simply a production issue. Okay, because when you think about that, you want to put out, say, 1 to 2 tons of biochar per acre, say on cropland or rangeland. Okay, you're looking at probably, I'm going to guess, 10 to 12 tons of biomass to produce that 1 ton of biochar, and so it becomes a production issue. We've had some people that are currently trying to experiment with incinerators that, they've had some waste facilities that have incinerators. We've got some people that are trying to experiment with that, to basically ramp up the production because, if you look at requiring 10 to 12 tons of biomass to make 1 ton of biochar, that's where we kind of run into the issue of actually just creating that supply. Does that kind of answer your question? Yes, sir.
If you want more information, MSU Ag Experiment Station is having a couple of trials going on right now. So they're working with different tonnage group. And they're also looking at yield improvements. Biochar doesn't necessarily have a improvement for it to start activating the soil. So MSU does have a couple of trials if you want more information about amounts of biochar, yields for different crop production, and also possibly sources of where they're getting it and costs.
Yeah, Dr. Johnny Dowu at NMSU, he kind of leads up a lot of those projects. He's not in charge of every one of them, but he leads up some of the projects that he works directly with us at NMDA. And like you were saying, yeah, it's not a fertility deal. Okay, biochar does not need to be viewed as I'm going to boost my fertility and get a crop. It's a long-term soil amendment that gives the ability to store carbon, store water over a long term. And so it does boost crop yields, but not in a way that we typically think of a soil amendment, if that makes sense. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. I'll be in the back. And like I said, if you want one of my cards, feel free.
All right. That might be better. Okay, perfect. So I'm Genevieve Allen. I work for the Bureau of Reclamation out of our Albuquerque area office, and I supervise our water planning group. And so we do a lot of grant administration, kind of serving as the liaison between grant recipients and our financial folks. We also do some of our own internal research and a lot of stakeholder outreach and participation in their initiatives. But I'm going to talk about some of our wildfire management funding programs. So first of all, I'll go over Reclamation's mission and how we see wildfire management really fitting into that. Go over our Water Smart programs and some specific examples where we are looking at wildfire and watershed management. Go into some other wildfire management programs as well as our own specific one. And I'll then touch on some of our open notices of funding for grants and some national wildfire references. So the Bureau of Reclamation was founded in 1902. We're generally known as a water and power agency. We set up a lot of irrigation districts and constructed a lot of infrastructure projects like Elephant Butte Dam, Hoover Dam, and Glen Canyon Dam. And we're under the Department of the Interior, and the Rio Grande Basin falls under our Upper Colorado Basin region, which doesn't make much sense because we don't really deal with the basin out of our office. But the Albuquerque area office is who you go to for projects in the Rio Grande. And the mission of the Bureau of Reclamation is to manage, develop, and protect water-related resources in an environmentally and economically sound manner in the interest of the public. So the Water Smart program is probably the main Bureau of Reclamation grant program. The main objectives of this are to conserve and use water more efficiently, implement renewable energy, investigate and develop water marketing strategies, mitigate conflict in areas at high risk of future conflicts, and accomplish other benefits that contribute to sustainability in the Western US. We are a West-specific agency. We're only in the 17 Western states. The Army Corps of Engineers takes over a lot of the responsibilities in the East that we kind of cover in the West. And this looks at the different Water Smart sub-program funding per fiscal year. And it's broken out by program. You can see that the fiscal year 2025 request is a little bit lower, but we usually receive significant plus-ups in our funding programs, especially with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And so I have a link to our Water Smart program's main landing page there. So our Water Smart programs can kind of fall into three different categories. We have our planning grants, our science and tools grants, and our on the ground grants. And several of these different grants opportunities fall under multiple different categories. So for planning, we have our drought contingency plans. We haven't really had many in the Rio Grande Basin, but those can be really useful tools when identifying potential risks related to drought in the future and potential projects. We have our cooperative watershed management program that I'll touch on a little later. And that's for really assembling a watershed group to identify local water management issues and come up with plans for different strategies locally. We also have our water strategy and project design grants. So we have a lot of water marketing folks trying to develop water marketing plans that are sound for the environment and promote the longevity of agriculture in different areas. We have our basin studies, and those are that's an interesting program because it's not a grant. It's a cooperative agreement. So part of the work is done by the Bureau of Reclamation and part is done by the recipient. And it's basically to address supply and demand imbalance. And we actually have one going on the Rio Grande right now. If you're interested in hearing more about that, happy to go into it. We also have water recycling and desalination planning. There's a grant right now that ISC has looking at brackish aquifers in the Rio Grande project. And a relatively new program that we have is our aquatic ecosystems restoration projects. I'll go a little bit more into that later. We have our applied science tools. That's a unique one because it's open to universities to apply for as well. Drought resiliency projects, that can span a whole bunch of on the ground and tool development projects related to drought. Basin studies again. And then for the on the ground projects, one of our most popular one is our water and energy efficiency grants. Those are really popular for irrigation districts for improving, for like higher dollar value water conservation projects. It can also cover some energy conservation projects, but we don't see that as much. We have our small scale water efficiency projects. That's a little bit more of a scaled down version of that. It's kind of an introductory grant to applying for some of these larger grant programs. And our environmental water resource projects, that's a really key one when thinking about wildfire and land management. And then we also have our Title 16 water recycling and reuse, our large scale water recycling, and our water desalination programs. And again, aquatic ecosystems falls under that. So it sounds like it might be difficult for me to click through some of these, but I think this will be online. So these are some key WaterSmart websites. We have our main landing page where you can navigate to our different programs. If you've tried to do that before, it's a lot better now. They've done a significant amount of improvements to that. We also have a WaterSmart calendar, and that's really good because it can show you what notices of funding are open, when a notice of funding might be advertised, who's eligible to apply for it, and program contact information as well. We have a program data portal, which is really helpful because you can see some successful applications that have gone through if you're trying to apply for something and want to see what successful recipients have put in their proposals. And then we have a data visualization tool. I have a screenshot of that. And you can look at the different projects that are going on in the area. So that's a really great resource as well. So environmental water resource projects, that's one of the sub-programs under WaterSmart. So this is for water conservation efficiency projects to increase the reliability of ecological values or watershed health, water management and infrastructure improvements that also benefit ecological values and watershed health, water management or restoration projects that benefit ecological values or watershed health, and then projects to improve the condition of a natural feature or nature-based feature. This is a pretty high dollar program. The awards can be up to $3 million of federal funding. There is a required 25 to 50% cost share for the non-federal partner in that, and it's a 3-year grant. And I have a link to the landing page for that one. And yeah, so wildfire really ties in pretty well to this program because of the watershed health nature of it. So this is an example grant that we have for an environmental water resource project. This went to the Chama Peak Land Alliance, and they're a land stewardship entity, and they really look at the health of a lot of our headwaters, and they do things like proactive thinning and a lot of community engagement. And so they received one of these grants recently. It goes all the way through 2027. They received $3 million, and they also added $1 million of their own funding. They're thinning over 2,000 acres of land in the Rio Chama and Rio Brazos headwaters. And this is a really critical location for the water supply that comes down into Albuquerque and other parts of the basin. So being able to mitigate some of the impacts of wildfires really, really critical to New Mexicans. We also have our cooperative watershed management program. This is a pretty popular one because there's no non-federal cost share associated with it. It is a lower dollar value program with a maximum award of $300,000 for a 3-year project. And that can go towards things like watershed group development, conducting outreach activities, gathering data about the watershed, watershed restoration plans, and watershed management project design. So this is a purely planning grant. And it's a little bit easier and less competitive to apply for. And it's meant to set up grant recipients to then apply for one of our larger programs, like our environmental water resources projects. So an example of a recent award under this program was to the post Hermit's Peak Cap Canyon Fire Expansion Project. That went to the Hermit's Peak Watershed Alliance, which was already an established watershed group. But they're facing issues in their watershed, such as stream entrenchment, loss of keystone species, and a significant amount of erosion, degradation of aquatic habitat, and several other issues. If you're interested, I have their proposal linked on that section. But they're really using this for watershed restoration planning and project design. They've already done a significant amount of planning. It's kind of unusual for a group to come to us that's already pretty established. A lot of these applicants are just in the planning phases of putting together a group. So excited to see what comes out of this. And this grant wraps up in 2027. So in addition to the Water Smart program, we also have a wildland fire and watershed health program. It's a little bit newer, but reclamation has really recognized that wildfire poses a risk to our infrastructure, our assets, and our lands. And the aim of the program is to protect water and related resources, reservoir storage, hydropower production from the impacts of fire. And all while supporting safety measures for stakeholders, customers, and the public at large. And this goes across all the 17 Western states. Reclamation does own about 6.5 million acres of land and water. So it's not a ton in comparison to other entities like BLM or the Forest Service. But we do participate in activities such as fuels management, prescribed burns, emergency stabilization, and post-fire mitigation. And I don't touch on this in the rest of the presentation, but we do have an emergency drought program. And if there is a drought-related natural disaster that is occurring in one of the 17 Western states that technically has an impact on our project, we can pay for things like emergency water hauling, and those are non-competitive grants. Also, if a critical well runs dry, we can pay for water hauling in that instance as well. So one of the good things about interfacing with our office is even if we don't have a funding opportunity available, if we hear from you about a project, we're able to work together to then, when there is money available, if it's advertised through a grant program or if it's not, we sometimes get a call for proposals internally, and we can elevate these different projects to the folks in charge of that money and sometimes get them sponsored. So under that wildfire program, we were able to sponsor a fire planning in the San Juan Trauma Project Headwaters project. This is a cooperative agreement with the Nature Conservancy for $340,000. And it's going towards a comprehensive fire planning effort for the San Juan Trauma Project Headwaters. And we're looking at pre-fire risk mitigation planning, immediate fire response planning, and post-fire rehabilitation planning. There's a lot of key partners in this, some of which include the Trauma Peak Land Alliance, the San Juan Trauma Project Contractors Association, and the Forest Service Guild, among others. So we're really excited to see this get off the ground. I know planning meetings have already started for this effort, but we're still working through some stuff with our financial assistance office to get the money to TNC. And then we also put in a proposal for a post-Black and silver fires mitigation planning effort. So we experienced a pretty significant amount of clogging from debris in Cabaya Reservoir that puts at jeopardy our ability to deliver water to our customers. So we applied for some funding to do some sediment and debris modeling work to look at how that could potentially Impact Caballo Reservoir. This debris usually enters the Rio Grande between Elephant Butte and Caballo. And the source is basically coming off of the Black Range of the Gila National Forest. So once that's done, the end product will be a technical report and some recommendations. So we are not a classic wildfire and land management agency. So I wanted to share some information about some other programs. One really great webinar series that we've seen recently is the Environmental Justice Technical Assistance webinar series. That's a really great resource. I've not attended one yet, but I've heard it's a great resource. The BLM also has a wildfire management program, so I have a link there. The NRCS has an emergency watershed protection program. And then the Forest Service also has a pretty robust wildfire program. I also have some national wildland fire references. There's the wildfire learning portal. I think I put the title on that kind of wrong, but it's an online management system, and it helps the community really meet education, fulfill education and training needs. It connects you to some national training centers and programs as well. We also have the National Wildfire Coordinating Group. So this develops fire operations standards, wildland fire position descriptions and qualifications, and information and technology capability requirements for wildland fire. And it also has information about coordinated national interagency wildland fire activities. And then there's also the National Interagency Fire Center. And this is the home to a lot of national fire management programs. And then the Wildland Urban Interface link. So this goes to a lot of different resources, but it includes some significant resources like outreach materials and research products. And then there's also the Fire Research and Management Exchange System. And this is a one-stop shop for information about ongoing and completed research on wildland fire. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention some of our upcoming notices of funding for our grants. Our water and energy efficiency grants, unless you're an incredibly fast grant writer, if you start now, you probably won't make the deadline of November 13th. But I will say a lot of times recently, we've been advertising multiple grant cycles per year. So even if you don't make the deadline for this, there will probably be 1 or 2 more grant cycles next year. We also have our small scale water efficiency projects. The applications for that are due January 14th, and our environmental water resources projects. And the example that I showed for that was the Chama Peakland Alliance project. And those applications are due March 11th. Like I mentioned earlier, we kind of serve as a liaison between our stakeholders and our grants office. So we're always happy to talk through potential projects, match you up with different stakeholders that could partner on projects or have ideas for similar projects. Happy to travel to meet with your stakeholder group or chat online. So please feel free to reach out to me. And if I don't know the answer, I can find you somebody that does. So that's all I got. Yeah.
You addressed a lot of wildfire, but how much flooding?
So we do have things like our water and energy efficiency grants, depending on the area of the Western US, that can address some flooding impacts. We also have the environmental water resource projects that can address things like slowing down water flows, again, depending on what state you're in, removing sediment and debris from sediment traps, those kinds of items. And then also restoring like native vegetation to prevent erosion on the landscape.
Are there grants available?
There are, yes, that environmental water resource projects grant. That one is live right now.
So the environmental water resource projects,
Mhm.
those like on the ground construction projects versus, I know you have the same category plan.
Yeah, so it can fall under both as well. It can cover some planning activities. Oh, is it under there? No, it might just be on the ground activities. Aquatic ecosystem can fall into both, yeah. And that's a relatively newer program to us. I think it was advertised for the first time last year. But if there's impacts from a wildfire that are impacting an aquatic habitat, that's a really great opportunity as well. Yeah.
Is it only non-federal entities that can apply to these grants, or can federal?
Only non-federal, yeah.
Like a case example I have is the Forest Service is doing a lot of stream restoration.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, they have funding to implement the stream restoration practices.
Mhm.
They don't have the funding or the subject matter expertise to do the data collection. That's where potentially grants might come in, but would that be a part of this course?
So I would have to know a little bit more about the project, but we encourage like broad stakeholder participation and coalitions on these projects. It looks really great if you can get some letters of support, but we definitely have projects where there's significant federal involvement, but we just cannot give money directly to the federal government. But if there's like if an agency has a contributed funding authority, sometimes folks outside of the federal service can put funding towards a federal agency. I don't know if that's something that the Forest Service or USGS has, but that can be a workaround sometimes.
You mentioned the cooperative watershed management.
Yes.
I was wondering if you've had them present with you so that other groups who may potentially be interested that are similar to HPWA could learn from them and lessons learned and how they are implementing that program on the ground.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. This is a relatively new grant program. I don't think the money has even hit their bank account, or it's a new grant. So yeah, we would definitely be open to that. We do have the links to successfully completed applications on that website, and that has the contact information for those folks. But yeah, always really happy to have partners with these grants present with us. Hey, Connie.
Second that idea. That's a wonderful idea. The other question I have is I'm really excited to realize how much of the liaison role you play. You've done a great job in Southern Mexico.
Thank you.
And I know we've talked about you joining the advisory group for a crop resiliency project for the Sapias. One of the things that we're looking at with that particular project is how agencies can really increase their community liaison.
Mm-hmm.
And I was super excited to see NMDA in your last program play that role and hear the way that you're playing that role as well. And one of the things that really pricked my ears was the cooperative agreement structure.
Mm-hmm.
But in particular, I think you probably come across the need for agencies to coordinate amongst each other.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you could just speak to a couple of those lessons learned and just bookmark that. Love to talk to you about that.
So lessons learned about coordinating with other agencies.
Yeah, for agencies to actually come together, work with communities. What are some big things that you're tackling in your community liaison?
So I think one of the bigger things that we're seeing is a lot of siloing for sure between agencies, which ends up resulting in a lot of duplications of efforts. We're also a lot of entities that federal agencies are interested in working with. We're reaching out to the same people time after time, asking them to participate in millions of task forces. So that ends up being a huge burden on folks. Also being able to figure out where different mission areas for our agencies overlap, and how that can best serve partnerships. Yeah, so we definitely, I think, as a federal community, have some lessons learned, I'm sure, from all of us. And another thing that we experience is there's a lot of turnover in the environmental field. So we're always trying to get the new folks up to speed, make those contacts. But those are some of the things that we're really seeing as challenges. But I think it's really important for federal agencies to do their research, look into what projects are being sponsored in a region, who potential contacts could be, and what are really the needs of a region, and how can our grant programs or other programs best suit those specific needs. So, kind of a convoluted answer to that question.
So my name is Alan Hook. I work for the City of Santa Fe Water Division. I'm a water resource coordinator within the Water Division, and I'm also the program manager for the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed. So thank you, WRRI, for inviting me today to talk about managing forestry health and reducing wildfire risk for source water protection is pretty much what we call it in the water industry. So I like starting with this photo. This is a photo of the Santa Fe River watershed, the upper part of the watershed in 1926. So this is the Santa Fe River coming out of the canyon. This is before we had 2 reservoirs built and providing our 40% of our water supply from the upper Santa Fe River. So on the left here, let me see if I can use the fancy laser pointer. So this is the outline of the upper Santa Fe River watershed. It is approximately 17,400 acres. On the lower part of the watershed, it's 7,100 acres. The upper part here is in the Pecos Wilderness. So that was passed in 1986, and it's 10,100 acres. And you can see, it doesn't outline it here on my GIS map, but it starts at Santa Fe Lake. Santa Fe River runs into our upper reservoir, McClure Reservoir, and then Nichols Reservoir. We can store up to 4,000 acre feet in these 2 reservoirs. So if you don't know what an acre foot is, if you're a farmer, you got 1 acre, you flood the field 1 foot deep, it's 325,851 gallons, approximately. And so we also have the right through the state engineer to divert up to 5,040 acre feet. So on a yearly basis, the city of Santa Fe consumes just under about 9,000 acre feet. So this is our cheapest source, our cleanest source, because it's coming from snowpack melt off. And again, we get about 40% of our supply from the upper watershed. Okay, to get into some of the science. So this is the Santa Fe watershed ponderosa pine. So this is a lot of work that Dr. Ellis Margolis did. What you have here, the horizontal ticks are ponderosa pine trees. And this is a timeline at the bottom from 1300 to 2000. So I don't know if you've studied dendrochronology, but basically you can cut into a tree and see from the growth rings fire scars along the way during the growth of that tree. So these vertical ticks are recorded fires in history. And you may say, well, Alan, how did you get like way back to 1300, even though this tree ended its life in the 1700s? I'm sure Ellis Margolis did not have a time machine, but a lot of times he could find dead and down trees and you could still find that tree ring or the burn scar in that tree ring. So you'll notice a lot of fire in the past. Low, high frequency fire. There was one in the mid 1700s that was all across the forest here. The last significant fire we had was right here across the southern Sangre de Cristos, 1862. You might see evidence of that in the Santa Fe ski area, or if you ever go up this time of year to go see leaf watching, that has cleared out a lot of that area from that fire where you see the aspen trees. And then one of the more significant things you see is there's less fire across the landscape in the last 120 plus years. So fire frequency just for Ponderosa Pine, and again, this is in our municipal watershed, was about every 4 years, kind of all fires, large fires, small fires, low intensity fires. For larger fires is about 17 years. So those are the larger fires that you saw in like the 1860, middle 1700 period. So stopping fires dramatically increased tree density. So one of the effects here is, and I'll try to show you my cool graphic. So this is an older Ponderosa pine that, back in the 1800s had space to grow. But as we started getting more tree density, you start seeing these smaller, what are called blackjacks. They're skinnier trees. They might actually be in the same age group. They just grew up very thin and they just didn't have the same nutrients or water supply to actually grow larger like this larger tree. And as you see, you start having more density within all these smaller trees versus the larger ones, which are signified by the yellow arrows, blue arrows of the smaller, younger ones. So with that tree density, you're getting more threat of wildfire. The smaller trees with the blue arrows, we call those ladder fields because as soon as those catch, those get into the upper canopy of the larger, more mature trees, and you start having high severity fire. And you can see we're getting more and more densities. One of the more significant things from, and I'm going to quote here, our environmental impact statement by the Forest Service in 2001. So previously in the watershed, we had tree densities of anywhere from 60 to 90 trees of Ponderosa pine. In 2001, after surveying, they saw it was 500 to 1,000 trees per acre. So we've, again, significantly had high densities. Some areas were like 1,200 trees per acre. So again, increased fire forest density and connectivity equals greater fire area at risk of high severity. So you can see the difference in 1935 of our watershed compared to even 2005. So this is the threat we had. And I also like this kind of rudimentary graphic. So this, anybody get what this giant red blob is to the east of us? Herbert's Peak, Calf Canyon, right? So this just happened in 2022. But before that, we had a lot of fires. It's kind of interesting. Vivash fires in 2000, Tres Lagunas, same time period. It seems like every decade, Tecolote fires, 2010, about every decade, we start having these large fires. And of course, you guys all watch the news. They're getting more intense. They're getting even larger. One of the key ones was Pacheco Canyon to the north of us. So this is the Tesuque Basin. This was in 2011. It's kind of interesting fire because Las Conchas was happening at the same time to the west in the WRRI Basin. It got so large, the smoke plume actually started covering this area, and you got a rain event on top of this while they were trying to do rain suppression, because that's how big Las Conchas was. The other next fire, 2020, so almost 10 years later, was the Medio fire. And that started here in the north part of the Tesuque Basin. We had a northwesterly wind blowing this way. If you've ever been to the Santa Fe ski basin, they were turning on their snowmaking machinery to douse their buildings because we really thought this was going to run up towards even the upper part of our Santa Fe River watershed and burn through here. What it did is it actually hit some of the old Pacheco Canyon burn, and also Suque Pueblo. I'll point out Ryan Suazo Hines had done a lot of mitigation work already with the Forest Service. So the prescribed burn actually was a success story because that fire dropped down in its intensity and then the wind actually shifted. So that helped the fire suppression effort. But for the first 4 days, we were very nervous this was going to make a run into this upper part of our watershed. So with that threat, we got a CFLRP, Community Forest Landscape Restoration Project funding through our local nonprofit, the Santa Fe Watershed Association, and working with the Forest Service and a national nonprofit, the Nature Conservancy, with the city, we started in 2009 the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Program. And it has 4 components. One, obviously, what I just talked about, fuels management in our watershed due to threat of wildfire. The second was ours, sort of water management, source water protection, outreach and education. So we bring fifth graders into our watershed. We do a lot of watershed hikes because this watershed's been closed since 1932 by order of the Secretary of Agriculture. And then we also have what's called the Nature Conservancy came up with this idea as payment for ecosystem services. So half the work that the Forest Service does, our constituents pay for through their utility bill. So this is the idea of shared stewardship through the Santa Fe Municipal Watershed Program. And as you can see, this is the example of thinned area in the foreground. This is the southern part of the watershed looking over into the city. And in the background, it has not been thinned in the wildland urban interface. So that's kind of an example of the differences within the watershed and the work done. This is what's called a challenge cost share agreement. So this is the city of Santa Fe's contract with the Forest Service to provide them the funding for half their work. Again, we've spent about $2.8 million over 12 years. And what's been really successful about this program over 20 years is all federal agencies get their funding October 1st. They're feeling good about the work. They've got a big fat budget. They're like, we're ready to do a bunch of pile burns, broadcast burning. But then what happens in like May, June, July? Fire season, right? So they spend all their money and they're like, we're broke. So that's where they come to the city and we can keep that continuity of continuing the treatments in the spring. And of course, this time of year, fall is a great time to do broadcast burning and pile burning. So this just doesn't happen overnight. The Forest Service just doesn't go out into the wilderness and say, or not even the wilderness, into the lower part of the watershed and say, we've got a lot of density here. Let's just start cutting trees or let's introduce fire across the landscape. So they first have to do mechanical treatments. So you can see that there's a lopper scatter here. He's, sorry, that was supposed to be the laser pointer. They're cutting a line here across the ridge line before they start getting into the lower parts and then really starting fitting across the landscape. So we have to do mechanical treatments. So this was starting in 2001. All these polygons kind of show all the mechanical treatments along the ridge lines, all around the areas that we wanted to thin, around the reservoirs, along the Santa Fe River, and especially to the northern part. We had a lot of high densities in this area. And of course, along here is 475 up to the ski basin. We've got homes over here in the wildland urban interface. So this has been part of the process. And then getting into the prescribed fire treatment. So next step, they have to go and they cut and they'll thin. They won't do broadcast burning, similar to what you see on the left there. It's more about pile burning initially. It's getting that density reduced. And you don't want to just cut and leave everything on the ground because then you've created what's vertical fuels into horizontal fuels. So they have to consume your fuels or vegetation. So over the years, with 20 years of treatments, here the crosshatch area is all the pile burnings that have occurred across the acreage. And then from there, we've done broadcast burning. You'll see the yellow has been one time. Orange, we've actually done 2 different broadcast burnings over time. So over 7 years plus. Since 2001. And then even in the areas above Nichols, we've actually done a 3rd time. We're eventually hoping, we were hoping this fall to get into North Aztec Springs in this area to follow up a broadcast burn, but it's probably not going to happen until next fall. The other part of it is these broadcast burns were initially done by hand crews, which now costs about $1,200 to $1,600 per acre. Now on this 3rd entries and even some of these 2nd entries, we've actually been able to do it with a helicopter. And they use what's called a disposable aerial ignition device. Looks like a ping pong ball. And they can actually shoot it. They have like almost a gunner shooting it out. And they can actually time and also create the intensity of the fire at the bottom of the basin. And that's only about $100 to $120 per acre. So significant cost savings to do broadcast burning, aerial ignition. Okay, so fire effects for reducing heavy fuels. So heavy fuels are what we call the over 100-hour or 1,000-hour fuels, which are basically logs, large limbs or logs on the ground. So you can see pre-fire with a broadcast burn, you had this limb here. It actually consumed, reduced the carbon matter. You burn some of the younger recruitment, but you still have some live trees still for the future. This is like the bottom of a basin where you can see we had a lot of woody debris here. So we want to consume that across the landscape. Again, reintroduce that carbon matter, nutrients. Some of these become, you could see lop and scatter. So we do this to sort of reduce the erosional effect, but they can also become nursery logs for future seeding. And then also fine fuels. So a lot of the grasses that grow, eventually, you know, this is actually how fire carried itself across the landscapes traditionally in the Southwest. These fine grassy fuels and forbs, lightning strike would carry low intensity fire through the ponderosa pine forest, even mixed conifer. And you can see it won't go up into the upper canopy because the ponderosa pine have actually lost the lower limbs and had them consumed from previous wildfires. Again, retaining that organic layer in the soil, consuming a lot of the pine needle duff that becomes very acidic, actually encourages more grass growth, forbs, so you continue that kind of low intensity fire ecological process across the landscape. And then we found in a lot of the treated areas, we get 50% more understory plant species in the burned area versus untreated. Again, it opens up the canopy, you get more sunlight, you get more carbon matter, get more grasses and forbs. And that's what we really want to encourage is watershed health, forest resiliency, and also helps us as a water utility on our water supply. So that's a nice little photo of some of the grasses and plants. So Santa Fe watershed mechanical and prescribed fire treatments have been successfully restoring historical ecological process and structure. So we're bringing back fire to the landscape. That is part of the ecological process. And again, that's creating resiliency and also what we call environmental services, which is for us, clean water for our water supply. Treatments have reduced the probability of a large high severity fire and post-fire debris flows. We found with some modeling recently in a study through the USGS that lower portion of the watershed, we actually did the treatments, that is 70% less likely to have debris flows of high intensities coming into our reservoirs. So that's part of the process of why we actually want to do this. And then the scale of forest and fire regime changes are much larger than just our single municipal watershed. So our management solutions should match the scale of the problem. What that means is we started with the municipal watershed, and now we have what's called the Greater Santa Fe Watershed Coalition. So we're working with the tribes, so Suque Pueblo to the north. We have private lands, Glorieta Camps to the east. We're working with state lands. So the idea is working outside the municipal watershed, just besides ourselves, on fuels treatments, introducing fire across the landscape, because fire's embers can travel like, you know, miles and get into our watershed. So even if we did a fire line across the whole boundary of the watershed, you wouldn't be able to stop a fire. So the idea is introducing these kind of successful treatments across the whole, quote, fireshed. So I like this kind of graphic because it does show our upper reservoir McClure here. And again, the mechanical treatments that we had early on and just initially entering the watershed, trying to introduce fire across the landscape. It was an evolutionary process. There were times the Forest Service burned some of those piles a little too hot. So they learned, like, how big do we actually have to do piles? How small? How far can we carry the fires across the landscape? And what's great about the Municipal Watershed Program is, like, the Forest Service, along with even city fire, county fire, state forestry has been involved. TNC has had their E-Trex prescribed fire crews in there. The great thing is, you know, they've kind of had to learn, like, how big of a fire can we have across the landscape. Our largest was 2,400 acres in 2016. And it got quite big. The smoke is an effect. In the fall, you'll get an inversion layer. So they had started it, and it actually started creeping back down through the river valley into the city of Santa Fe. So they had to learn, like, well, we're probably not going to go past 1,400 acres max. even though I'm always pushing them to get money spent, and I'm like, let's do 3,000. You know, they say, yeah, back off, Fallon. So it's a matter of understanding the parameters that you have, because smoke does become a factor. And this is a good photo of the aerial ignition. You can see as the smoke rises, we try to get a westerly wind, take the smoke out over the wilderness area, not back into the city. But a lot of times, some of the best times in the fall that you have moisture on the ground, but you could still burn, you get the inversion layer and it actually moves into the city. And that's what we're trying to avoid with our partners, getting the word out. Hey, there's going to be a prescribed burn for the next 3 to 4 days or week. But that's better than, months on end with a potential wildfire. And with that, any questions or any comments that I can take? There's in the back. We haven't. We did for a while. So actually, let me go way back. It was more like ATVs is one of the ways that the Forest Service gets into the watershed. So I'll show you on the map here. If I get through the trees. Yeah, in this area, we had, see up this ridge line, they were moving a lot. So on these southern facing slopes and aspects, you get a lot of sun. We have a lot of granitic soils. So it took about like 8 years for these areas, like especially up here above Nichols and in these basins, to grow back. And some of the access roads they had for ATVs took quite a while. And so we would get some erosion coming in through here. But after that large prescribed burn in here, we were kind of worried because we had this potential 3-inch rain event in October. And so the way they did the lop and scatter, we actually found that the erosion that was coming down, it actually created sinuosity around there, and it worked. So we didn't get a lot of sediment coming into McClure. That was one thing we were kind of really concerned. As for most of the mechanical, they try to get it along the ridge lines, so they're not creating a lot of erosion like in the basin itself. Again, with the prescribed burning and the recovery of the grasses and the forbs, we haven't seen a huge significant amount of sedimentation into the reservoirs. Sure. Might have been a lot of detail, but I hope I got there. Go ahead.
So wildfires becoming the preeminent threat to water resources. It's more and more common to hear a city planner or a water resources professional just sounding like a wildfire firefighter.
Yeah, a little bit.
Wildfire ecologist. Up in Taos, we joke that our local watershed alliance has cut down all the trees alliance. And so 2 questions. 1, can you speak to what participating from a planner's perspective is like in that? And 2, how much time do you guys spend looking at post-fire watershed impact, sediment pollution?
Well, we're getting into that, and I think I would say over the last 5 or even 10 years, source water protection has become a big issue for water utilities. So I do spend quite a bit of time. I'm glad Genevieve brought up the San Juan Chama headwaters, because I was part of that proposal for the San Juan Chama headwaters, and because we get 50% of our supply with the San Juan Chama project for that. So we're really interested in like, hey, what could happen? We are looking at, emergency planning, like what would we do if there's a lightning strike, and especially these basins up here, which are some of our best watershed yield, but they're going to also bring some of the most debris flows. So we did have recently modeling efforts done, looking at all these sub-basins, like what are the areas if this does go up. Just one thing to know, we don't do prescribed burning up here in the wilderness, because in spruce fir, you don't want to reintroduce fire. Spruce fir typically goes all at once. Every 250, 300 years, it's stand replacing. What is our plan in case this watershed does go? And so we're looking into that. Like, given that we have the modeling now, understanding which basins potentially become the biggest risk or the biggest yield for post-fire debris. Some of the initial results said there is potential, especially McClure could get up to 2,000 acre-feet of debris. It's not going to come all at once in one event, but that's a potential within a year to get that much in here. And that's really looking at, we kind of looked at 3 parameters. It was if you had low intensity, moderate intensity, or high intensity fire. And then the other 3 of the matrix would be if you get a 2-year event. So that's a 1-inch rain event, say in a monsoon, or a 2-inch rain event. And then we have what's called the probable maximum precipitation. So that's like over 12 inches. So in the moderate, rain, in a moderate, like 5-year rain event with a moderate fire, most of these basins, especially in the upper watershed, you're going to get debris flow in. If it's a high intensity fire, all bets are off. Most of these basins, you're going to get debris flows. So from there, what's our plan? So we've been doing catastrophic kind of supply scenarios to see, what can we do, while typically in the West, it's like it takes about 6 years to come back to where the whole water balance has come back and you've got more stability. But it could take up to 10 years, which happened to Alamogordo. So that's part of our kind of forward-looking planning. You kind of have to understand the fire frequency. You got to be kind of like a silviculturist, but at the same time, understanding your water resources and how you can adapt to that potential threat. Any other questions? Nope. One more.
I was wondering, since the fire, have you seen an uptick in the number of participants, people that are interested in going to the Watershed?
So,
I just wondered how that's going.
So we've kind of had a mixed bag. We've definitely had more participants in what's called the ambassador program. So the county has come up with a community wildfire defense program or protection program. City of Santa Fe got CWDG grant. So our CWDG is the grant. So that's Defensible Space Grant. So a lot of people in the wildland urban interface realize, oh my God, like this is going to happen to us. So they've been trying to do defensible space, thinning out on their own properties. It's kind of hard because a lot of people, they have coyote fences, which are made of wood latia. So it's a fuse around their property. So trying to understand how to mitigate that and protect them in the wildland urban interface. But you also have some other people that are like, look, the Forest Service burned down everybody else's homes in Moore County. Why should I trust them? 98% of like prescribed burning treatments are not, never escape. Unfortunately, we had to our neighbors to the east that 1%. So there's a little bit of trust issue happening. But again, with a lot of our partners, Forest Guilds is a good example of that. Over here to Glorieta Camps, they did a pile burn last winter. We did a pile burn right here in Aztec Springs. So this is all the Nature Conservancy's land. So they did a pile burn in this area successfully. So it's gaining back that trust of the public to say, hey, this does work. Again, that's been pile burning, not necessarily broadcast burning yet. So it'll be interesting to see how this North Aztec Springs project, it's actually this piece, 650 acres, goes off. And, again, on this side of the mountains, we've had success for over 20 years. So I do trust the crews, but it's going to be watched heavily to see, make sure things don't get lost. Another question.
Why did you say you don't introduce fire to that up in the things?
Well, two reasons. In wilderness, you can't use chainsaws. So they can't go in with heavy equipment. They can't cut out the lines. You'd have to go back to the 1800s and get your buddy to handsaw every tree, which is pretty tough. So there's about 19 basins here that they identified that they could introduce fire either by hand or aerial and let it burn up a slope as long as there's snowpack or enough moisture that it would put itself out. They they could probably go up with hand crews, and they're going to potentially look at this hand crews and cut line above it. They just did a piece here of like 250 acres of piles. So they cut and created piles, and they'll probably burn it in 2 years after cures in the winter. But this area, anything above the mixed conifer with spruce fir, again, spruce fir, especially white fir, grows really fast. It's kind of like the rock stars of the woods, and it grows really fast and then dies out. And it gets, once you get like density in there, you get a lightning strike, and that fir will start to burn, and it takes the whole thing with it. So we don't want to be the ones that lit the fire that took the whole thing and potentially, took out our favorite recreational area, the Santa Fe ski basin. So that's kind of the evolution. And one day this will go. I mean, one day this will all burn up here. It just depends how intense and how much. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you very much.
What I'm gonna do today is talk about the lessons we learned from the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon fire. We were the hydrologist for the city of Las Vegas, and this has really been, as everybody probably knows here, a pretty unbelievable event for the community. So it started on April 6th, and it was an out of controlled burn. What we understand from talking with Forest Service staff, the folks on the ground told the Jefe Grandes, don't start it. And they had it scheduled, and they started it anyway. Burned almost 350,000 acres, and burned the Gallinas watershed, which is the source of 98% of the city's water. And the way that we've expressed it was the Forest Service broke the river and broke the watershed. So in terms of lessons learned from this, I'm not going to go through this list, but these are all the different governmental entities which the city we had to work with during this period of time. And you can take a second or so just to digest all of this. And some of them we never even knew that we were going to be dealing with. Yeah, there's 23 of them. And thanks to Senators Lujan and Heinrich and Teresa. And then we had another 6 NGOs that we worked with, trying to coordinate with them and address common issues or issues they had that we could help them on, or issues that they could help us on. So this is what it looked like 1 month after the fire started. This is actually the Saturday before Mother's Day in 2022. We went into the forest before the Forest Service allowed their employees to go into the forest. They said, and we just said, we're going in because we've got to look at the watershed. This is our sole source. And we're trying to address what we're going to be doing for the next year, at least. So this is what it looked like 1 month after the fire started. The funny thing was, we'd go into town before we went up there. There'd be ash and debris coming. This is after COVID, sort of the end of COVID too. We'd be wearing masks outside in the city, and then we go inside and take our masks off. But we didn't realize how smoky it was when we were up there until we actually looked at the pictures we took. This is, for those of you that might know the Gallinas watershed, this is the El Porvenir Bridge. Still hasn't been replaced by the Forest Service yet, and isolates camp and a lot of individuals who've got cabins up there. This is what a lot of the forest looks like, or looked like. It still does. And you can see we've got this long-term supply of logs and debris that you'll see some pictures of later that aren't in that exact same location. So this is the Gallinas watershed. For those of you that know Las Vegas, here's Story Lake here. Here's the river. And then here's the city's drinking water diversion. And in terms of the water system features that the city has, so right here is the USGS gauge If you go on the USGS website, it's the Montezuma gauge. And this is the gauge that controls how the city shares water with the Gallinas Acequias and Story project. The city has 1,200 acre feet of 1835 priority water rights. The Acequias have a variety of water rights that date between about 1835 and 1881. Story project, Story over here, has the most junior right in the system, and that's a 1909 water right. So we use the USGS gauge to share, and I think someone was mentioning, I think it was Katie this morning, mentioning active water resource management. This is where active water resource management started in the state, and where we developed it with the state engineer. And here's the diversion below the gauge. Water is diverted at this diversion on the river, goes through a settling basin, a sedimentation basin, a skating pond, which is another permitted point of diversion. From the sediment basin, it's piped up to Peterson and Bradbury reservoirs, two main reservoirs that the city has. City also has 800 acre feet of storage in Story Lake. And what it is that they own empty air in Story Lake that can be filled and refilled anytime during the year, not to exceed the 800 acre feet. And then this is the drinking water plant at Montezuma. And for those who know the area, Montezuma Castle, United World College is right over here. And the picture, the intro slide, was the fire above Montezuma Castle. So these are a series of gauges that we installed with the USGS. And there are some of you I know that know Jim Reister in our office. Jim spent days walking around in the ash with the USGS to locate new gauges. The Western Springs rain gauge has been in there, for decades. If you look at the legend here, this yellow circle with the dots in it are, flood, rain, and turbidity. These are all new. The Big Pines gauge, Oak Flat, Johnson Mesa, El Porvenir. These were all put in. These are real-time gauges. And what these gauges provide is for the emergency managers for the city of Las Vegas and San Miguel County to be able to get real-time predictions on flow in the Gallinas. So if we think it's going to reach the city and create flooding, they at least have some kind of early warning. This was the first time that the USGS ever collaborated with FEMA on a project like this. So this shows the Montezuma gauge just looking at, this is just discharge. Before the fire, it measured discharge only. And this is just monsoon season in 2022. And the graph in the lower right is a blow up of this portion of the hydrograph. And you can see that these post-fire rainfall events result in very rapid, flashy runoff, and they're orders of magnitude higher, as you can see, than the pre-fire events. And this creates all sorts of issues for the city and the drinking water supply. So this goes to just about a month ago. This was, and a little typo up here. This should be 2021 here, our bad. But what you're seeing here is the blue line is the 2021 combined precip from June 1st at Westner, and the dashed line is the Gallinas mean flow pre-fire. Post-fire, here's the cumulative precip from 2024, which is significantly higher than the cumulative precip that we had earlier. So what you can see is that we have these Western, they're called Western spring rainfall, and you can see how flashy that the hydrographs show that you're getting these super flashy runoff events, and we'll show you the turbidity in a little bit later. But The problem we have is that this is Montezuma gauge. We'll get to some pictures a little bit later showing big contributions of both flow and ash and sediment from tributaries that come in below the gauge where we have absolutely no early warning available. So this is a little bit hard to read. The red line here, so this is river flow and turbidity. Okay, so this red line here is 20 MTUs, which is about what the city's water treatment plant can treat. This is an old water treatment plant. It has limped by for decades. And then once the fire happened, we had some real problems. And we just were awarded $98 million from FEMA to build a new drinking water plant to handle these big turbidity spikes. So if you look here over to the left, if you're seeing these big spikes, see, we didn't have, this is 2023 and 2024. 2023, we didn't really have much of a monsoon season. This last year, we did. So you can look and see all of these mean daily turbidities in this last monsoon season just being so high that the city's water treatment plant can't handle it, brought in what's called the Viola active flow system for pre-treatment of the sediment before it goes into the city's drinking water plant. So after the fire, as you saw the list of the 23 governmental entities we worked with, the USGS developed a debris flow probability map for this storm here. What you can see here, here's the city diversion right here. You can see high probability of debris flows above the city's diversion. And right here in Cañon Alto and Sebastian Canyon, which comes down behind United World College or Montezuma Castle, and into Guyanus, and this comes in below the gauging station at Montezuma. So we flew the fire, the drone imagery of the fire, and the Corps of Engineers use this for planning their preventive measures. And you can see an ash-laden river adjacent to this area where they brought in the protections for the city's diversion. So the Corps put in 3 sets of these gabions. Each one of these lifts is 3 feet high. So this is one of the preventive measures that the Corps put in that was supposed to be temporary, and it's sort of pretty permanent right now. But you can see that it's already been catching a fair amount of debris. We also put in GeoBrews. I think I said that right. We call them GeoBrews. But these were developed in Switzerland to control landslides. And for those of you that travel the gorge between Velarde and Taos, you actually see some of these on the east side of the road where they're catching rocks and debris. And the way these are set up, you have these tension rings here. So when the GeoBrew gets filled with debris, the rings compress and give some flexibility to this netting. And as you can see, this is all handwork. So anytime you want to clean one of these out, you've got to get some trained individual, professional, who knows what to do and come in and fix these by hand. And you can see here, this right here is just one of the tributary arroyos that caught all of this debris just from one event. And then we have the GeoBrew running across the Guyanus. Here's, let's say, fresh, undisturbed GeoBrew. But what you'll see now, the one on the right is a blow-up. This is from one storm event in August of 2022. And we've had multiple ones. So the GeoBrew had to be taken down, all of this cleaned out, put back up by hand, and I guess I'll say rinse and repeat. And 10 more years, We really don't know how long this is really gonna last. And then the city also needs long-term funding, which they receive, to clean out the gabions. You know, and the thing is, you need a long-armed excavator with a thumb bucket to be able to grab the logs. And the city doesn't own one of those, didn't have staff to do it. So this all had to be contracted out and eventually reimbursed by FEMA. But the city had to put the money up first and then get the money back from FEMA. So another preventive measure they would put in were these log booms, these floating booms. This is Peterson Reservoir here. And here's a boom above our diversion here holding back. And then this is skating pond too. You can see they're pretty efficient as well as you can. Basically, they're holding back the flots. They're holding back the floaties, not the sinkies. And you can see how they're working, but once again, these are going to be there for a long time. Unfortunately, last summer, I don't have a polite way of saying this, so I'm going to try and figure it out. Some people just cut the log boom at the skating pond. Well, you know, I guess they got their jollies. They had to repair all that. The thing on this slide here, this is the bypass channel around Peterson. So to the south and north is up. Here's the dam right here. This is 120, 115-year-old dam. And at the south end of it, there's a berm to divert water around Peterson. State engineer didn't want us to take the water from storm events in the canyon, and so you have to divert around it. Well, you can see here, it filled with ash. And then, once again, more log boom prevent. This is out of order. Sorry. But what happened in July, you know, while the fire was still going on, the fire was not 100% contained until August, 4 months after the Forest Service started it. So the bypass channel, full of ash and debris. There was a small culvert here so they could drive over it, backed up, washed it out. And you can see these areas here where it flooded into Peterson and effectively took out the city's use of Peterson Reservoir during that period of time. And so we did some bathymetry studies at the time, and you can still see the bypass channel full of ash. And we'll show you some other bathymetry slides after this. There's a big concern from the NMED, Surface Water Quality Bureau, and Hazardous Waste Bureau about what we're going to do with the debris that we were cleaning up. So we did post-fire sediment sampling both at Peterson and up the canyon. And I didn't want to show you a really ugly, terrible slide we had. But what I'm going to say is that the heavy metals concentration upgraded of disturbed areas was actually cleaner than what we were seeing. I mean, what was dirtier than what we were seeing at the fire. We used the same methodology when we mapped the canyons draining Los Alamos after the Cerro Grande and Los Conchas fires. And it was a very different kind of result on the heavy metal concentration in the sediment. So we effectively were released from any kind of concern from the Surface Water Quality Bureau and the Hazardous Waste Bureau that we're going to be handling hazardous materials or any kind of heavy metals improperly. So these were the water quality impacts, and I'm not going to read them, but you guys can all look at them and take a look at it. You know, one of the biggest thing was the change in the water chemistry of the river and how the water treatment plant had to respond to it. Because, like I said, this was an old plant that was limping by before. Our chemical use went through the roof during this period of time, and we're seeing these daily changes in turbidity, DO, and temperature. And eventually, and the citizens understood there was a problem, and they were getting warmer water in their houses because of all of this. So, I said, you can read all of this. And then we have a perpetual supply of water, of ash and debris above the city's diversion. think of it, that you have an ash mine and you're not going to run out of ore reserves for 10 years or more. And this is Sebastian Canyon. This is the canyon that comes down behind United World College. This is the head-gated story. So what you can see is all of this ash and sediment deposited here, and then the river, the canyon cut down through it. This Sebastian Canyon is ungauged and unmonitored, so we don't really know what the hydrograph looks like or what the turbidity is on it. But this comes in below the city's diversion, below the Montezuma gauge, and eventually goes into storage. Fast forward to 2024. Right by United World College, on June 21st, 6.5 inches of rain in one of our buddies' rain gauges there, okay, in a 3-hour period. Big rainstorm. And that came in below Montezuma gauge. So we didn't even see, we saw something at Montezuma, but nothing like this. And then the floods came. And you've seen pictures of these gabions before. That's what the gabions look like right after the flood. And then we had multiple failure points. So I was talking earlier about the bypass channel around Peterson. What happened was this berm here that diverted the water into the bypass channel breached, and we had all these multiple failure points along the bypass channel. And once again, 2 years later, took Peterson out of commission. And so here's bathymetry from this last summer. And I don't expect you to read all of these different contour lines, but the important thing to notice here is that in 2022, a month after the fire, we had a 40-foot depth contour. Now the 40-foot depth contour is gone. So approximately, a 12-acre-foot reduction in a 200-acre-foot reservoir occurred in those 2 years, but we think dominantly because of the June 2024 flooding. And then this is, you can see the breach in the Peterson bypass. There's Peterson here. Here's a breach in the bypass channel on June 21st. I showed you a picture of Sebastian Canyon before, and that this gate was standing and locked. This fence here was totally intact. So this is what happened 24 hours, less than 24 hours after these big floods came from this big storm event. And then this was the southern end of Peterson in June, the day after the storm and the floods. And what you're seeing here, NRCS 2 years before that had seeded with barley and did a pretty good job. You can see it lying down. But you see when I talked about perpetual supply of ash and sediment, this is a drinking water reservoir, folks. So what do people do? How do people plan for these kinds of things? Well, it's pretty hard to plan for a controlled burn that became uncontrolled. But the ISC, for their 50-year water supply, 50-year plan resilience assessments, these are the issues that they want all the communities to address, like I said, especially those with surface water resources. And so lessons learned, is sort of government to government interaction. We truly were building the plane while we were flying. Any community should have this anyway with the water asset management plans. But you need a detailed inventory of city water and infrastructure assets. We did a survey, I said, even before the Forest Service allowed their folks to go up there. Just in a 5-mile stretch, we inventoried 150 different assets, whether it was culverts, bridge, power poles, things like that, to be able to come up with an inventory of damages for infrastructure that needed to be replaced. FEMA is not designed for fire responses. FEMA is designed for hurricanes and floods. We had the head of the FEMA district out there with Senator Lujan and Congresswoman Leger Fernandez, and they told us straight out, we're not designed for this. They were flying the plane as they were building it too. FEMA, we're learning all of this. FEMA doesn't do anything preventive. They only come in after the disaster. They do fund mitigation, which is good. But we also found out on government to government that regulations do not often allow the agencies to easily work hand in hand in an efficient way. Emergency response contracts from the feds need to be very flexible because the dynamics of the system change very rapidly, and reach out to your elected officials very early enough. So technical lessons, forest management, conjunctive use, you could read all of this. But, the big thing for the city, is that these ash and sediment contributions, the increased amount in the city's water source, and you can see this, a normal of 30 NTUs to more than 3,000. The plant was designed to treat 20 NTUs. And then our planning for treatment was really hampered by these huge daily fluctuations in the river water quality. And you can read the rest of this. The bottom line is we had significant increase in cost to operate the drinking water plant. And as I said a few minutes ago, now FEMA's come up with $98 million to replace this aging drinking water plant with a new, let's call it state-of-the-art modern one. It will be able to handle these fluctuations in turbidity and these high turbidity flows. And that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
How long does it take to build a treatment plant? Is that like a 2 or 3 year project or longer?
Hopefully 3 years, maybe 2, but I'm gonna be conservative and say 3.
Are there concerns about the Peterson Dam infrastructure, like the dam itself?
The dam was scheduled for replacement anyway. Okay, I mean, there's been concerns about the dam failing. It's amazing. Okay, it's been there 110, 115 years and hasn't failed. This most recent event, this back in June, it overtopped the dam and the dam held. So those engineers back there in the 19 teens knew what they were doing. We got lucky.
Great. So my name is Kate Ziegler. I'm an independent consulting geologist based out of Albuquerque. Although, as some of you know, my primary territory is northeastern New Mexico, where we do a lot of groundwater work for agriculture. And I'm grateful for a chance to follow behind Jay, because my talk's going to build on what he's spoken of. But what I want to do today is share with y'all some preliminary data from groundwater in the Mora Valley in western Mora County post-fire. And so a little bit of backstory. This is looking south from Chacon, about 9 months after the fire, where the snow does a great job of highlighting what we lost in that country. Prior to the fire starting, my team had already been talking to Mora County about designing just a real basic groundwater monitoring program for this area that was going to build on monitoring work that we were doing to the east in the Mora-Wagamouth Soil and Water Conservation District. And then the fire happened. And so in the aftermath of that, the county scraped together a little bit of money for us to do some preliminary sampling of wells in the area to look at groundwater chemistry and groundwater quantity post-fire and hopefully subsequently for many years thereafter. One of the things that I want to point out that we are fighting with here is we came into those with basically no preliminary data. So of all the wells that I'm going to show you data for, only one of them did we have any data from before the fire. And so being able to say what was pre-fire condition for these aquifers versus post-fire condition is really difficult. And so a lot of what I'm trying to extrapolate is based on my understanding of groundwater quality and quantity in geologically similar areas in other parts of northeastern New Mexico. So I'm going to do a lot of arm waving and a lot of proxy comparisons here. For reference, the first year and a half of this project was funded with $15,000. So I didn't have a whole lot of money to work with, but I'm hopeful that we were able to put together and whoa, that did some fun things with background graphics. It's supposed to just be water droplets. I'm not really sure what's going on here. I think we're going through a little time warp. So to tell a little bit of the story, in July of 2023, we were granted this one-time amount of money from Mora County. And with the funding from the county and guidance from both the County Commission and the Planning and Zoning Commission, we managed to recruit a handful of folks in Western Mora County who volunteered their wells. And what we were doing was checking static water level, measuring total depth of the well so that we have an idea of the volume of water in that well, and then taking samples for general chemistry and trace metals, and where we thought it might be interesting to know a little bit more about potential for recharge, we took samples for tritium. So in 2023, when we started in July, we had 18 participants with 22, and we're now up to 31 participants with 35 wells. And basically now, I don't know why I'm being dinged out.
I'm sorry. The mic is live.
So basically we're growing this organically. We did not go out and say thou shalt sign up. Basically we had members of the different commissions reach out to neighbors, reach out to family members, reach out to friends. We've been working in Watershed Water District since 2015. So we also had connections into these communities where we were able to reach out and say, hey, we've got some funding. Can we come and take a look at your well? And so from this, we've gathered a very basic picture of some of the groundwater characteristics for these areas, but is this an overall perfect characterization of this space? Not at all. Okay, we're only into this year and a half. We didn't have any background data really to build on, so we're doing the best we can. But this is to give you an idea of the distribution of the wells that are in our monitoring network as of the end of September, because we're still getting phone calls from folks who would like to have their wells added in. So we've got the hogback here with the highway that eventually leads up to Ocate, going up this way if you're familiar with this country, and then the highway coming through Mora, Cleveland, Holman, on up to Tres Ritos. And so we've got a pretty good distribution of wells along the Mora Valley and up a lot of the side canyons, including all the way up to Guadalupita. And then this summer we added some folks in Gascon, which tends to be one of those canyons that sort of gets left behind. So the funny thing is the Mora San Miguel County line runs right here. So you have to go down into San Miguel and come back up to get into Gascon. So this is showing you sort of our distribution of wells. But one of the other things that we're doing with these wells is I have what I call my gatekeeper wells. So we have wells in here that are directly adjacent to or within the burn scar. And so we're looking for immediate impacts on the groundwater resources because of the fire. But we also have wells like this one out here near La Cueva, these ones down here in Carmen, and ones up in the area around Trujillo. That these are farther away from the burn scar. And so if I can continue to monitor these every year for many years, I'm watching to see, do I start to see impacts starting to show up farther and farther and farther away from the burn scar over time. And then I do have a couple deep wells, one in North Cleveland and one in Ladue, where I'm also watching for that vertical influence in deeper waters over time. And so a handful of these wells are my gatekeepers that I'm going to watch for many years to come, provided we can keep the funding rolling, just so that we're watching that long-term impact of the fire on these local aquifer systems. Of course, it's always good to keep your geology in mind. Your geology, even in these alluvial unconfined aquifers, the material around that aquifer is what was eroded to form that. And so a lot of your chemical characterization is coming from the rocks around that area. And so we have to keep that in mind. And so we're going to see slightly elevated sulfates and nitrates just as naturally occurring materials in these groundwater sources because of the geology in the area. And as we get out into some of the areas like Trujillo, We are also seeing wells drilled into the granite basement rock, and so we're gonna see naturally high uranium levels. And that's normal for those wells drilled into those kind of rocks. But because I came into this, or my team came into this with no groundwater chemistry data from before the fire, I have to have some sense of what the rocks are providing me versus what the fire might be introducing in, or fire scar related water may be introducing into those aquifers, if that makes sense. So I'm going to run through just the water level data really quickly and then get into some of the water chemistry data. Water levels in this area range from 2 feet below ground surface. You know, you can reach down and touch it if you want to. 220 feet below ground surface. Total depths vary from 70 to 300 feet for our wells. And our average water levels are in the 30 to 50 feet below ground surface. You know, as Stacy knows, my team spends a lot of time running around measuring a lot of different wells. Most of the wells we work with are 180, 200, 250 feet to water. So my team has been stoked to work on wells that are only 30 feet to water. Running steel tape all day is a lot easier on these wells. What we saw though that was really horrifying our first year out there in terms of water quantity was when we took our first static water level measurements in July of 2023, we came back and we did them again in December at all the exact same wells. And what we saw was from July to December, so about a 5-month time span, was the majority of those 22 wells had fallen, some up to 10 feet in 5 months was the decline on the water table. Most of these are shallow, unconfined alluvial aquifers. And so we were seeing sort of a horrible combination of many things coming together. We were seeing just a perpetual drought in this region that's influenced a lot of our water tables, both confined and unconfined. But we were also seeing, because there's a strong connection between the acequia systems and the rivers and these alluvial aquifers, that because the acequias hadn't functioned since the fire, because they were clogged with debris and they were lined with ash, the seepage of water down through the bottoms of those acequias to help recharge the local aquifer systems was not happening. So we have drought, we have clogged acequia systems, and we have just inhibition of infiltration everywhere on that landscape because of the ash that's covered everything. So we have these wells that have fallen up to 10 feet in 5 months, which is really frightening to see that, especially for communities that have this balanced relationship of using water both from their surface water sources in terms of the rivers and the acequias, but also from their groundwater. And so as the acequias were not flowing, what were people turning to? They were turning to their wells. And so we were seeing this just additive impact in this time. We came back in July 2024, measured all the same wells again, plus some new ones, and almost all of these wells had recovered to July 2023 static water levels. We've not come up a little bit more. And it's because we did get a really good snowpack last winter, and we got snow events and then warming, and snow events and then warming that allowed that water to get on down into those alluvial aquifers. In addition, NRCS and NMDOT were finally able to come in and work with the Acequia Association and the local mayordomos to start to actually clear out the acequias, and a lot of our major acequia systems are now functional from now. But I would, and I'm going to keep this idea coming through these slides. This is something that's come up in FEMA, high-level FEMA discussions as well, is the idea of cascading impacts. We are by no means out of all the impacts we're going to see from this fire. And so just because the acequias are clean and functional right now does not mean they're going to be clean and functional 6 months from now. So we are going to see repeated clogging events. We are going to see ash repeatedly moving through these systems and everything that ash brings with it. So as long as we keep the funding going, we're going to keep watching these water tables, because the other aspect of this is as you diminish that standing amount of water in your aquifer system, you're also concentrating analytes that you may not want to be concentrating. So in terms of water chemistry data, in 2023, we sampled 19 of the 22 wells for just general cations, anions, and trace metals, because again, I have $15,000. There's not a whole lot I can do with that. So a lot of the big scary carcinogens that everybody's waving their arms around about and that they want to know about, I don't have the money to sample for But what we can do is use things like nitrate, orthophosphate. We can use those as proxies for water that has been influenced by burning of significant amounts of vegetation. And so we're trying to use this as a very loosey-goosey proxy for water that is influencing the groundwater system post-fire. Of the wells that we sampled in 2023, 17 of them came back with chemistry that looked pretty standard for the geology of the area. So nothing of concern. We did, however, get 2 samples that had measurable orthophosphate and 5 that had nitrate that was well above what would be expected for the geologic conditions of the area. So remembering that we are in an area of black shale and limestone, so I should see some elevated nitrate in those waters, but I was seeing nitrate way beyond what I would expect to see for that geology. So some of the questions that we're having to think about in terms of these analytes getting into the groundwater is when are we hitting soil and rock absorption thresholds? So when do we just have so much nitrate, phosphate, sulfate that we're just overwhelming the natural ability of these systems to capture and hold on to those anions? So we've got that with water infiltrating down through the soil, down through the alluvial aquifer, down through fractured bedrock to get down into these groundwater resources. But the other thing we have to worry about out here, and all of the photos that Jay just showed you are the perfect, this will make you worried, is wells that are literally being overtopped during flooding, and so you're introducing things down into that groundwater system via the wells themselves. Most of these wells are fairly old. A lot of them are in sunken well houses. They're cinder block built 3, 4, 5 feet down into the ground. So it's very easy for you to get water to overtop those wells and for things to go down via the wells themselves. So we came back, sampled all those same wells again. This time we only did cations and anions. And then for new wells, we did cations, anions, and trace metals. And again, because I'm running with an extremely limited budget, this was our way to just kind of keep tracking certain things through time as best we could. And as with the water tables coming back up in July of 2024, one of the other heartening things that we saw was that those elevated nitrate and orthophosphate levels, we did not observe those levels in the same wells in this past summer. So again, my hope is that with the acequias functioning and us finally getting some decent snow up there, that we're starting to flush things through the system. But again, cascading impacts. Are we going to have good wet years every year? No. Although I did just get a text message this morning that Sapayo's got 15 inches of snow on the ground and more coming. So it looks like it's going to be a banner year for snow, which we're very grateful for. But when we have those drier years, are we going to have those diminished water tables? Are we going to see the acequias getting clogged again? Are we going to see pulses of ash across the landscape that are going to inhibit infiltration? And then also, as we do get water moving from the higher country and the burn scar down through the sudscape, through these aquifer systems, is there potential for other analytes that we're worried about to be migrating through these systems? The big one we hear a lot about, of course, is PFAS. But we also need to take into consideration that we burned infrastructure up the mountain. We didn't burn so much in Water County as we did in San Miguel County. But we burned barns, we burned houses, we burned vehicles, we burned equipment. There's a lot of material that's now loose in that system. And so understanding where is it going, when is it going, how long is it going to take to move through, and therefore when and where are our stakeholders at risk from the drinking water coming out of their wells. So this is just a map showing the wells that we sampled in 2023. So our red ones are where we had high nitrate levels. We saw a cluster of these in home in Cleveland. And then the orange ones are where we had high phosphate occurrences. The 2 that had the phosphate, one was the Cañada de Paro. And if y'all were paying attention to the news, there was a flash flood that came out of the Cañada shortly after the fire, and a gentleman was killed because it flowed over the highway right there to Guadalupe, and he was swept off the road and drowned. So that well is right in the path of that flood, and so we think that well was probably overtopped in that flood event. It was 8, 10, 12 foot deep water, mud, everything under the sun that just came out of that entire canyon. And then our second well that's up at Vallecitos, this landowner, the fire came right down to her house on all sides. And the well was adjacent to the house. We don't think that the well was overtopped by flooding, but she's in a fractured limestone and she's completely surrounded by burn scar. And so assuming that things are moving down through that fractured limestone, potentially into that groundwater. And then again, our nitrates in Turkio, Cleveland, Holman, and South Carmen. Where we did luck out is we had one well in Cleveland, Holman, right here in this cluster that we had sampled in 2021 because the landowner was concerned about her drinking water. And so we did have a baseline data set for that well from 2021. And when we compared it to 2023, the nitrate level had increased by 5 times between 2021 and 2023. That well is also situated in a low spot where water is going to tend to pond or flood through that low spot. So the other thing that we've been doing, and this has just sort of come organically as we've gotten to know folks in the community, is landowners are now speaking to us directly about what they're observing from their water in terms of changes in color, smell, what are they seeing on their landscape. And so we're seeing people say, when we get when the river is high, my water turns gray. It smells yucky. It's not really a sulfur smell, but it smells, one person said it smells like death, which is, it makes your skin crawl to think about this. Some people, when they've had water sit in the bucket, they notice a thick yellow sludge starts to develop on the bottom of the bucket. We've done testing for sulfate-reducing bacteria and iron slime bacteria. We're not really seeing those, so one of the things we need to do is take a sample of that slime and try to figure out what is this stuff that's settling in these buckets. And I added this in. This is a well house in Cleveland, and it's only maybe 1.5 feet down step. So this is their yard, and there's a little concrete step, and they have a little shed built over their well house. And the wires here are going down to the well head, and that's my boob right there. And we're sitting, this well house has got about 1.5 feet of mud in it that came from when that area flooded right after the fire. We don't know what solves in that mud. I can't access the wellhead here. We're going to have to dig this out. But we're seeing problems like this throughout the burn scar. And this is one of those little details that gets lost in the bigger community recovery picture, is things like, how long is it going to take somebody with a shovel to clean out this well house for us to do a shock chlorination of this well and get it back up and running so that this lady has a functional well at her house. She has had a non-functional well for 2.5 years now. What is it going to take for her to be able to have this? And these are just those little details alongside the bigger community recovery picture. Where we lucked out is we've been monitoring wells in Wagon Mound Salt and Water District since 2015. And that salt and water district, they turn part of their annual budget for our well monitoring to us sampling repeatedly wells that are right along the Rio Mora and the Rio Sapeo. So these are wells that we already had data for. And so we're going to be able to come back in, and every year we're just going to keep sampling those wells for chemistry again and again and again. And so that's this salt and water district's way of partnering with their neighbors to the west to help see what's coming down the river. And then additionally, a lot of the ranchers that we work with have been calling and saying, you know, the ditch systems where Coyote Creek enters the Rio Mora, Golondrinas, you know, when we opened the ditches in 2024 to irrigate, we saw this black sludge come down through the ditches. We saw the same black sludge down east of Watershed, which is across I-25 from all of this. And so we're also listening and recording these observations along our downstream partners as we go. And so the results are pending for the water chemistry samples we took from the wells along the river. But we're going to, again, keep sampling those for as many years as we can. Those are my extreme gatekeeper wells for this whole situation. And to give you an idea of kind of where we are, this is my furthest east western Mora well at La Cueva. We saw black sludge in the ditches here where Coyote Creek comes into the Rio Mora. And we saw it also on the Tipton ditch over here between Watershed and Balmora. And then our sampling wells in the Mora Wagon Mound District network, we have one here along the Rio Mora, one here along the Rio Mora, and we have one right here along the Rio Mora. And those are the ones that will repeat sampling as well. So as long as we can keep funding rolling, so our county funding ended at the end of the fiscal year. Mora County is not a wealthy county, and there's a lot of fun politics in Mora County. So our second year right now, we're running on a private donation from somebody who took their money for getting burned out and turned it over to paint to continue this work. So we're going to continue static water levels and what chemistry data we can through June of 2025. We're going to continue documenting changes in color, changes in smell, changes in everything that everyone out there has, everything that they're hearing and seeing and smelling. We're trying to keep that data going and then watch how this is going out along the Rio Mora, because eventually that gets to the Canadian and that goes on downstream. So watching those cascading impacts through time and space. We are working with FEMA and DHSEM to try to figure out appropriate water filtration systems for individual households based on what we think may be getting into the water, and sometimes standing up in front of FEMA and yelling at them and saying, groundwater? That was a horrifying moment to realize there was nothing in the FEMA structure to deal with compensating people for the loss of their wells. That was not anywhere in the program until this past February. So that's been a little bit of a scramble to get that up and running. And then starting in 2025, we'll be working with Dr. Japana Blake with the USGS to start a similar monitoring effort for the entirety of the burn scar. And so that will be with FEMA funding to sample wells and surface water throughout the burn scar for 4 years, so that we can build on the, this kind of segment. So, again, huge thanks to Mora County for funding this, for our anonymous donor for funding this. Both the County Commission of Planning and Zoning, they recruited a lot of landowners, and they really helped us to get our feet under us out there and learn where to go and who to talk to and how to navigate all of this. Mora Wagon Mound for the funding to keep monitoring the Rio Mora wells. And really at the end of it, a huge thanks to landowners and stakeholders who are willing to let us come in after a hugely traumatizing event and work with their wells and work with these communities and provide us with an opportunity to serve. So with that, I will take any questions.
Right after the burn, FEMA had contacted the Office of the State Engineer saying, we can't find well drillers. And I was in meetings with probably 30 federal people, we're like, hey, give us a list of, who's affected, these kind of things. And they're like, well, we're afraid you guys could be punitive to them. It was like this really weird conversation. But seeing that one well that has been submerged in debris, I would not recommend that well be rehabilitated. That needs to be replaced, and that should have been pushed to the forefront 2 years ago, 3 years ago. It's really frustrating to me to see that somebody's still living like that, and I'm so frustrated at the whole process.
Yeah, it's really hard to keep the 4-letter words in my mouth.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And that brings up another point that one of the other things FEMA's now sorting out is the lack of well drillers, qualified well drillers in the state of New Mexico.
I had a list of 15 or 20 that are ready to mobilize, but we could not get a list of who needed to have their well looked at. And so it's everything is so broken in the whole process. And of course, everybody's looking back at the state engineer, we're the ones that are holding up the process. But when I put out a call to all 200 well drillers, I'm not kidding you, there was 50 of them. They're like, oh, no, you could go up there right now. But there's been no coordinated effort on behalf of these poor people that are affected. It's just really sad, very sad.
Yeah, and I agree that, ideally for the person whose well I showed, that we would have the ability to drill her a new well and make sure that it was set up properly such that we weren't worried about, continued contamination. But in the meantime, because that is not currently an option, what are the options we can do literally with baling wire, duct tape, and a gallon of bleach? Because I can go buy a gallon of bleach at the Family Dollar. But that's where we're at right now. I mean, we're doing the best we can, and it's so cool to see Jay here. I know that he's working on this stuff too. But one of the things I've seen from sitting in FEMA steering committee meetings is this interagency issue that you brought up, where they all sit there and talk at each other, and then we come back 6 months later and absolutely nothing has happened, except for the very small agencies and organizations that are nimble enough, like nonprofits like Hunt Peak, Storms Peak Watershed Alliance, that can get on the ground and do stuff because we're small and nimble, and we can survive on all sorts of burritos and Coors Light because that's the speed my team operates at. But how do we do these big wholesale mountain-wide efforts when we can't get our federal agencies and state agencies, county agencies synced and moving together?
I got responses using 4-letter words, Kate.
Okay, so anybody who doesn't want to hear 4-letter words can go out in the hallway. Well, the rest of us are going to have a conversation. But it's, I think what's frustrating to me is that it's come down to smaller groups coming in and just being able to just get in there and do stuff when we're 2.5, 3 years out from the fire. And Tedessa still has a well that's under 2 feet of black, god-awful mud that stinks. I don't know how to fix this short of, whichever one of my staff I don't like that week is getting a shovel. I'm just going to go dig for well out.
Well, thank you for everything you do.
I'm just trying. Same with Jay. So. You're just one canyon down from us. Any other questions or complaints?
Because of the geology, did you encounter any wells that had very high sulfur?
So I had wells with sulfate present in them, but it was sulfate that I could not attribute to anything beyond the local geology.
Did that poor woman apply to FEMA to get the well replaced?
I don't know if she has. She has a notice of loss filed, but because groundwater and wells, and I mean, what you're hearing is different from what everyone on the ground is hearing. Wells were not been on the notice of loss form until February of this year. So if you had filed a notice of loss a 1.5 to 2 years ago, you may not think I need to go in and explicitly say that I need to have my well repaired or replaced, because that was not one of the bins that the claimants off, I can't think of the name of the claims office. The claims office folks would help you to fill that paperwork out for.
It's necessary to replace the well, like if the well head is sealed and there is mud covering it. So if you put up mud, it should be okay.
So a lot of our wells are older and they don't have that nice sanitary cap on them. They literally have a metal plate with a hole in it for the wires to go in. Yeah. A lot of these wells are 50, 60 years old, and they're not your traditional well engineered well with the sanitary plug on them. These are literally, they just put a metal plate on it. So yeah, there's stuff going in that well. We deal with some very interesting wells.
I just have a quick question. When the Whitewater Baldy fire happened on the Gila, the ash that kind of coated the river bottoms caused people's wells to dramatically drop. And people went and just scraped the ash and sediment to get it to recharge. And we have had monitoring wells that showed that. But there was a bunch of riparian vegetation that died back. Did you see any of that during that time when there wasn't water infiltrating, or did it flood kind of and sort of disrupt that type of soil or ash?
So I don't know that I saw vegetation die back. But we did see that this weird sludgy slime that had coated the acequias completely, which is presumably an ash something. One of the things though that we've heard is vegetation along the riparian areas has been thriving because there's elevated nitrate coming into it, but the livestock won't touch it. And we're getting plant varieties people haven't seen before starting to come up. They're probably, they're uptaking selectively things that are in that ash-laden material that's flooding out onto the floodplains. But the high nitrate is harmful to livestock. So while we may be seeing a lush response in the riparian areas, the thing I didn't even think about, which is great for keeping, further erosion, but for people who depend on an agricultural lifestyle, if your livestock won't eat your forage because your forage is so high in nitrate that you're going to cause high abortion rates in your cattle, then you can sit there and cut and bale that stuff forever, but what are you going to do with it? So there's a lady in Cleveland who's got a hay barn completely full of 2 years of cuttings that she can't use because the livestock won't touch it. And I think Sonny, our extension agent, actually sent it off for testing, and the nitrate was through the roof. But I'm also not a vegetation person.
Right
so.
now, yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's super exciting to hear that you've got a project with Dr. Joanna Blake going. Can you say anything about the scope of it? Are you optimistic about long-term groundwater monitoring happening in the burn scar there?
Yeah, so the tentative plan, and so USGS and FEMA have finally signed their we love you paperwork, right, which takes forever. So we're all in harmony, the money's coming. And I think our concept right now is initially we were going to try to sample 4 times a year. So during the winter, snow melt, monsoon, and post monsoon. And I think now we're going to dial it back to winter, post snow melt, and monsoon. So we have 3 seasons that we're going to sample. I think we're looking at 100 to 150 wells throughout the burn scar and an additional 50 surface water sampling sites. But that's all dependent upon recruiting. Because the other thing is we have to find folks who are willing to let us come in and work with their well or get access to surface waters on or near their properties. And so I think our fingers crossed optimistic would be to start this spring. So we're going to spend the winter recruiting, reaching out through our county commissions and through the folks that we're already networked with to try to find participants throughout the burn scar, because we'd like to be able to jump and get going as fast as we can. And it would be a 4-year effort with hopefully an option to renew. If FEMA and USGS still love each other. Yeah. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share our crazy little effort up there.
Interdependent watershed restoration. And a couple of years during COVID, when we were all at home, during this conference, I think Phoebe Sweeney, who's the IFC commissioner, by Watermark, shared this story that we're born dependent, we seek independence in our team. We seek independence, and then in our maturity, we recognize our interdependence. At the time, it was really powerful to me because I think my family was stuck in the independent phase, and so I remembered it. And I think she was, of course, saying that as a metaphor for ecosystems. And so I'm going to link thinking about watershed restoration to rivers during this talk. So the storyline, I'm going to offer some updates on the Rio Grande Water Fund. It's gone through a kind of revisioning process in the last year. High-level update of the Cree Apache Nation water sharing project. Thoughts about stewarding our rivers. So all of this is super familiar given the last 2 talks. The Los Conchas fire in 2011 really prompted the formation of the Water Fund in 2014 because of high severity burns and
Albuquerque not being able to get water for their community, a black jar there. So the water fund is a vehicle designed to bring together public, private, and nonprofit sectors to act collectively to protect forests and water sources. Activities include pre-fire mitigation, so fire, prescribed fire thinning, then mitigating post-fire impacts, and post-fire recovery, which is, has included some tree planting in the last year in the Hermit's Peak landscape. So just on the bottom right, you can see kind of the project benefits: saving lives, protecting forests, improving water quality, protecting wildlife, and creating jobs. And I'll reference those as we go through these slides. And so the water fund is focused on protecting water source for downstream communities, Bay and Albuquerque primarily. And as part of this revisioning process, this 10 years of being in existence, it was helpful to kind of look back at what the accomplishments have been. So 251,000 acres of forest restoration, 5.3 million directly raised for restoration, 52.8 million of public funding brought to the landscape. That includes, for those people who listen to the City of Santa Fe presentation, that probably includes city money as well. 50 plus projects funded, lots of partners, signatories, jobs created. So the vision, the Conservancy worked with a consulting firm called the Water for Nature facility to help look at what the last 10 years had been and think about the next 10 years. And so this is the vision: a watershed resilient to wildfire where people and biodiversity thrive. And just I want you to focus on the core pillars. The waterfront coordinates collective action, does a lot of implementation and high impact projects, and that's really the focus now is trying to be a bit more strategic about where the treatments are, influencing policy and decision makers, offering strategic analysis. In the past, this has been looking at modeling of debris flow after fires, for instance. So driving evidence-based strategic priorities and then inspiring investment. I come from the Gila, where in southwest New Mexico, people look at northern New Mexico and really envy the sort of resources flowing to northern New Mexico, and it is where the population base is, so that partly makes sense. This is the Rio Grande waterfront landscape, and in the darker colors on the map is where the wildfire risk is higher. So it's the ridge of the Sangre de Cristos on the east, the Jemez Mountains, and Chama headwaters. So the focus in this past year has really shifted to looking at the San Juan Chama headwaters. So this is a landscape that brings Albuquerque and Santa Fe something like 80 to 90% of their water. So it makes sense to focus on where the water comes from. And I just want to share this story. My colleague Jason Scullion is the new forest strategy director for the Conservancy, and he was visiting with the contractor working this landscape up by Cromo, New Mexico, which is right by the border of Colorado, west of Chama. And the contractor's name is Nick Dolichuk. He was just describing all the treatments he's done in this landscape over the years. So Nick is 6th generation from this area, and described to Jason how many more contractors are available to work with to do this work. So to me, it's inspiring that there are more people out able to have businesses that do fitting work and mastication. And he also pointed to the elk that are in that opening that he created a couple of years ago. So it's also benefiting wildlife. And that was the first snowfall, which was a week ago. So Nick, this is a map he's created of treatments that are happening on the Night Ranch. So the Nature Conservancy received a community wildfire defense grant about a year ago. Still working through the paperwork. It's a $9.8 million grant to treat 2 ranches, 2,500 acres, and the green circles are where some of those treatments will happen. I will say I don't have the details of the budget. It doesn't seems like a high cost, but I'm sure there are other things besides just treatment and the grant. So yeah, I think for me it was just impactful to hear about one person's long-term investment and restoring this landscape. So the water fund really relies on a ton of community support. These are 103 signatories and a network of partners. So they're implementing partners, the Forest Service, State Forestry, the Forest Stewards Guild, Chama Peak Land Alliance. The original speaker for this slot was Caleb from the Chama Peak Land Alliance. They're a key partner in this high priority landscape. They work on private land to do a lot of thinning and burning. And it benefits elk habitat, which is a major income source for landowners up there through selling elk tags for hunting. Then there are collaboratives. They kind of underpin a lot of capacity building and training and information sharing. The 232, the piece of strategy partnership is in that landscape, as well as some others. And these are all just a sample. They're not exclusive who the partners or collaboratives are. And then, of course, there are funders, reclamation, the Forest Service, the water utility, Conservancy District. So that's the overview of the water fund. Going strong. I feel like it's exciting that there's been more focus, and I think our state director likes to say we don't want to practice random acts of conservation. We want to be strategic, and so that's kind of what the water fund is trying to do, is focus on high impact areas or other areas if there's a compelling reason. So this is the same kind of landscape. This is the San Juan watershed to the west of Chama, and you'll see in the green is the Great Apache Nation Reservation. And the tunnel, the Azotea Tunnel that brings water, the San Juan Chama water to the Rio Grande actually starts on that reservation. So last year, there's a rentee. I think the video of this project was shown, and so I'm not going to show it this year. That's the link to it, which will be in this presentation when it's put online. But the Hickory Apache Nation Water Sharing Project is a 10-year agreement between the Nature Conservancy, the Interstate Stream Commission, and the Hickory Apache Nation. And it leases, allows the nation and the ISC, to sovereign governments, to lease 20,000 acre feet per year, up to 20,000 acre feet per year for 10 years. That's kind of the bones of the project. And I just want to highlight some of the benefits of the project with the theme of kind of doing high impact projects that have multiple benefits. So one is that the project increases water security in the Colorado River Basin. So we know the supply-demand imbalance in the Colorado is not going away, and New Mexico needs to deliver their amount of water downstream, and this helps them meet that obligation. So water security is compact compliance. And it also is securing water for threatened and endangered fish, the Colorado bigtail and razorback sucker. So these flows, the first scientists who are part of the San Juan Recovery and Implementation Program, who are trying to recover these fish, get them off the endangered species list, know that they are missing rearing and nursery habitat in the river. So these are side channels and backwaters that are created by scouring floods and inundated by higher flows. And there's a dam, there's Navajo Dam on San Juan, which holds the water in Navajo Reservoir, where the water is being released. And when the recovery program has the ability to do a spring flow pulse, like they did 2 years ago, because there was snowpack, we were able to add this water onto that release, and so it actually could do some moving sediment and creating habitat for the fish. And then there's also a whole monitoring and adaptive management program going on to understand how these flows impact the river and the habitat. And that's just a cool graphic of the historic river channels of the San Juan with the dam. There's kind of one entrenched river channel that's armored with a lot of native vegetation. A really important component of this project is creating a model for effective collaboration in the Colorado River, as well as bringing forth the need for equity. And so this is Daryl Behill, the former water administrator, and he and Celine Hawkins, my colleague, who we see her back of her head with the blonde hair, is a water attorney. They kind of came up with this project, and Daryl's a really strong proponent, as I am too, but he's an articulate actor in trying to center tribes being compensated for their water in the system if they're not using it. So the water we're leasing used to be leased to a coal-fired power plant that closed, and so the tribe no longer received revenue for their water, and it was just being held in the reservoir. So this is a project where they can be compensated for their water that is benefiting the system. And I think it's particularly pertinent when there are other entities in the basin who are being compensated for not using water, but tribes are not. So very cool opportunity to center tribal equity. And so thinking, we sort of started with watershed work for water for people, shifted to thinking about using water for multiple benefits, for water for downstream delivery for people, as well as water for fish. And now just shifting to thinking about how we steward our rivers into the future. And so like on the Rio Grande and many rivers in New Mexico, we have increased acidification. The leap ahead analysis shows that, some massive decrease in water in our state. And in the center is, those are just pictures of the Gila River downstream of where the river comes out of the wilderness, downstream of where the river is diverted into 2 irrigation ditches. So historically, the river would, well, I shouldn't say historically. I've worked on the Gila for 18 years. The river goes dry in the spring when flows are low. And this is the first year I've seen it dry from spring, summer to fall. I think maybe this rain event of this week, bumped it up enough that it might be wet. But this is the trend, is an increased period of low flows, dewatering, increased reach. And like the Middle Rio Grande, the acequia system, and as Katie described, is really intertwined. The benefits of the acequias with creating forage for animals, but also vibrant riparian habitat that benefits flycatchers and cuckoos, our 2 listed birds. It's all very intertwined, but I think the work that I am really interested in doing is like, how do we try and balance these needs going forward, knowing that we're going to have less water? And I think this is the hard work we get to do in this space if we care about having flowing rivers, which offer lots of benefits to us, and also are, one of the ways we deliver water downstream. So I think my reflection is, like, if we have healthy watersheds and healthy and water for people, do rivers thrive? Not necessarily. We could have healthy rivers and healthy watersheds, but maybe people don't thrive. We actually need to be thinking about all 3 together: healthy watersheds, water for people, healthy communities, and also healthy rivers, because they're all super interdependent. Last slide is just highlighting the importance of that. These are a bunch of kids out at the Iron Bridge on the Gila River learning about the river. This was a couple of years ago. Rich just walked in. He was the one leading this day. So that was kind of the high level overview. I'm happy to answer questions. I also do have a handout about the degree of change project with water sharing agreement if folks are interested in learning more.
What was the duration of the lease agreement with the?
So it's 10 years.
10 years.
And we just put in the 3rd water order and paid for it. So we're looking at releases this next year. And the 2nd year, the water, which is this year, water was released during the summer, during low flow period, when the Wolf River is kind of hot. And the second amount of the water, as it was kind of divided, is being released now. And that is allowing the state to test how well the water is moving during irrigation season and after irrigation season, because they're interested in downstream benefits, as well as whether those backwater habitats are inundated. So that's being monitored as well.
That's water released from Navajo Reservoir?
Yes, released from Navajo Reservoir. Yeah, and I would say, I mean, the state has this very cool program called the Strategic Water Reserve that allows them to get funding to support these kind of leases. And so that has been part of the funding mix. It's a little bit of private funding and state and federal funding that's paying for the lease. It's a big, big fundraising effort. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.